Welcome to the ARO seminar series centered around the topic of music perception. Today, we are delighted to have Dr. Elizabeth Stegemoller as our speaker. My name is Dr. Jessie Brown, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Before starting today, during the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the chat function directed at me as a moderator to avoid interrupting the presenter. Following the presentation, in addition to using the chat function, feel free to raise your hand to unmute yourself directly and ask your question. Any questions that aren't addressed during this session can be answered by the presenter in a follow-up email. Closed captioning for this meeting is available for your use, and this session is being recorded and will be made available for additional viewing. If you have any technical difficulties, please email headquarters@aro.org for assistance, and they'll put that email address in the chat. So a little bit about Dr. Stegemoller. So she is a music therapist and a neuroscientist and joined Iowa State University in 2013. She's an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology and the director of the graduate program in neuroscience. Dr. Stegemoller's research focus is to understand the neurophysiology associated with the therapeutic effect of music in persons with Parkinson's disease, or PD. She has completed multiple funded projects examining the effects of singing in persons with PD and has over 60 publications in her career. In addition, Dr. Stegemoller offers several outreach programs for persons with Parkinson's disease, including weekly singing, dance, and boxing groups, as well as yearly events such as the PD Singing Festival. Dr. Stegemoller is very passionate about her work and hopes that through her research and outreach efforts, she can contribute to the development of new and innovative therapies involving music for persons with PD. Dr. Stegemoller was my mentor during my PhD program at Iowa State, and it is a privilege to moderate for her today. To the best of our knowledge, I think we are the only music therapists with a doctoral degree in neuroscience, and I am honored that she entrusted me to follow in her footsteps. What isn't mentioned in her bio, and something that I think is maybe equally important and that I can speak to firsthand, is that she is an extraordinary mentor. She is supportive and encouraging. She is also a busy mentor. She has a huge lab of undergraduates and 10 graduate students right now, right, Dr. S? She's very busy. But most importantly, she is a genuinely lovely human being. She's very caring, and she's a beloved an integral part of the Parkinson's disease community in Ames and beyond. And I couldn't have asked for a better mentor and now a friend. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Stegemoller, who will be presenting her work entitled Singing in Parkinson's Disease.
All right, thanks, Jessie. That's hard to follow up. This is so lovely of an introduction. And I didn't pay her to say any of that. Hello everyone. I'm excited to share some information about some of this work that we've been doing in the lab, and we'll focus on I'd say 10 years now worth of work on looking at singing in Parkinson's disease. So for the talk, I'll start with just a general overview of Parkinson's disease. It never hurts to hear it again if you've already had it. And even as someone who works with people every week with Parkinson's disease, it's always good to have a little bit of an overview for myself and keep me on track. Then I'll talk a little bit about why singing would be a good option for people with Parkinson's disease. And then we'll go into kind of the behavioral evidence for singing, followed by kind of the newer direction that we are headed in trying to understand the underlying mechanisms. So I will say that the data for the underlying mechanisms is going to be a little bit more sparse than our behavioral data, but that is because we're but we are starting to move in that direction. And then there'll be a short conclusion and of course questions as you have. So what is Parkinson's disease? Parkinson's disease is the second most common neurodegenerative disease in the United States and in the world. And it's actually currently one of the fastest growing neurodegenerative diseases. It is caused by a loss of dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra, which is part of the basal ganglia, which is that dark circle, that black circle there shows where the substantia nigra is. And this loss of dopaminergic neurons results in our cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's disease, which include tremor, rigidity or stiffness, bradykinesia, slowness of movement, gait disturbances, and postural instabilities. However, these symptoms are just kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Parkinson's disease symptoms. The basal ganglia has several loops and interconnections with pretty much the whole brain. And there's also evidence that some neurodegeneration happens in other areas of the brain and brainstem areas in particular before we see some of the degeneration in the substantia nigra. And so you can see kind of under the iceberg here, there are a lot of different areas that are also impacted by Parkinson's disease. And these other impacts can lead to other, we would call non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease that are heavily affect the quality of life. And some are factors that lead to death in people with Parkinson's disease, and particularly looking at difficulty with swallowing and respiratory control. I wanted to get my pointer going and I didn't get it going yet. Here we go. So things here like difficulty with excessive salivation, but difficulty in swallowing and respiratory problems. So you imagine if you have difficulty with swallowing, foreign materials will get down into the lungs, and then you need to have enough sufficient force and muscle coordination in order to cough and expel those foreign materials. And in people with Parkinson's disease, that ability is impaired. And because we can't expel foreign material out of the lung, it will lead to aspiration pneumonia, which is one of the leading causes of death for people in Parkinson's disease. However, not all of these symptoms, including the cardinal symptoms, respond fully to medication or surgical treatment. Even though it does pretty good, we can't fully ameliorate. I can't speak this morning, so I apologize. These symptoms. So there remains a need to find alternative treatments that have a pervasive effect on all symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And of course, in our lab, we believe that that would be music. So then within music, why would we think about singing for Parkinson's disease? Well, first, music in particular has been incorporated into treatment for Parkinson's disease for a long time, and in other areas include dance, drumming, and even piano training. There's been research on these ways, including music. But all of these involve some sort of overt movement. So if you're going to dance or if you're going to drum and even fine motor control for the piano. And so it may be difficult to determine if the benefits of music, if they're from music or if they're from actually doing the movement, skilled movement or even physical activity. Because there is a plethora of literature that shows the benefit of exercise, in particular, or physical activity for people with Parkinson's disease, and also, continuing to learn or use the movement like fine motor skills or movement sequencing, and how that can benefit people with Parkinson's disease. In addition, many of these interventions are limited to individuals who still have sufficient balance and mobility to perform the activities, especially dance. Drumming, maybe not as much, and if you're going to sit and play the piano, maybe not as much, but definitely for dance. And so it limits even the people with Parkinson's disease, maybe in their later stages, that may be able to benefit from these type of therapies. So if we look at singing, we would say that it is an intervention for all persons with Parkinson's disease. I can tell you in our singing groups, we have from newly diagnosed all the way to still have a participant that's been in our group going on 11 years now. And I have seen people all the way through to the end of stage of their lives. So we know that singing is an intervention for all people with Parkinson's disease, and because we're sitting and we're singing, there's not a plethora of overt movement. So it helps us sort out more of, well, what is going on with music and singing. You know, yes, we have the breathing and facial expression and whatnot, but there's less of the physical activity component and overt movement sequencing and movement learning. So this will help us to determine a little bit better what might be the effects of singing in terms of music for people with Parkinson's disease. And in case you didn't know, singing, especially singing groups, are very popular in the Parkinson's community, and there are several groups across the world. So I'm going to show a little video here of that. All right, I love that video. You know, show it almost every presentation, but to see that there are groups from all over the world, Australia, England. I know of groups in Argentina, some in Germany, but also all over the United States. And I also like to see the many different forms and arrangements that each group has. Some with piano, some with guitar, some sitting in a circle, some sitting, you know, in rows. Just shows you there's lots of different ways to engage in singing. So we're going to jump into some of the evidence for the use of singing in Parkinson's disease. And so this was the first study. And if I tell you a little secret, I thought I got this grant to do this singing study, and I thought I would do this grant and then I would be done and move into a different line of research that I thought I was going to pursue when I first was hired at Iowa State. But I think the powers that be had other plans for me. And so after running this study, noticed that doing the singing group was very popular within the community. And you know, you write that next grant and you get funded, and then you get funded again, and you're kind of like, oh, well, that other line isn't getting any hits of funding, so I guess maybe I should look at singing. Seems to be going well. And so I'm happy to say that this grant was the very first grant in 2013 that came with me from Florida when I transferred. And we've been doing funded research on singing ever since, and it's been a blessing. So for this first grant, it was supported by the Parkinson Study Group. It's an 8-week singing program. We were able to recruit 30 participants from across Iowa. So we had 4 different singing groups. We had 2 in Des Moines, 1 group in Ames, where I am, and then another one in more northeast Iowa. All of our interventions were led by music therapists, and they included vocal exercises and group singing. So the vocal exercises were things like mezzo de voce, where you start soft and then get loud, exercises that work across the vocal range. So, you know, a lot of like the ha ha ha, a lot of people know that one, or me me my mo moo, very common vocal exercises that you might do in just a regular choir. And then our group singing, we used songs that are specifically targeted for certain areas that might be of need for people with Parkinson's disease. So you'll hear in the video, Maresy Dotes and Dozy Dotes and Little Lambsy Divey for articulation. And that song also goes over a range of an octave. So we're also looking at vocal range, articulation. We work a lot on breath support. So we do a lot of breath exercises of supporting from the diaphragm, breathing fully, and bringing the air out front with the sound. We also focus on facial expression. So you'll see sometimes when the video hits them, the eyebrows raise, because we talk about lifting the eyebrows. And believe it or not, maybe it's just in my singing groups, but for me, lifting the eyebrows seems to be also a cue to lift the palate, the back of the palate, for when you're singing, to create more space for a more resonant sound. And we talked about smiling with the eyes, and good posture sitting up. And you'll see that we don't use any printed music. We now transfer into a screen on where people can still sit up and look at a computer or a big screen TV to see words, but we don't use any printed music because we want to avoid stooping forward, which they already have a tendency to do. So that's a little bit about kind of what the intervention is like, and I will show this video.
Maresy Dotes and Dozy Dotes and Little Lambsy Divey and Hiddly Divey too, would you? Maresy Dotes and Dozy Dotes and Little Lambsy Divey and Hiddly Divey too, would you?
Just an example there of what therapeutic singing would look like, our group singing. We also use like You Are My Sunshine, and we work on the breath control, where maybe the first time we go through, they can breathe every measure, every 2 measures, every 4 measures, every 8 measures, to try to get them to work on that sustained breath control. So our outcome measures were in voice, like vocal duration, vocal intensity, vocal range, things like that. Respiratory control. So we use this spirometer here and had participants breathe in as forcefully as they could and breathe out as forcefully as we could, and measured maximum inspiratory and expiratory pressure. We also used EMG on our swallow muscles of the subthalamic and laryngeal muscles to measure activity during swallows. So they completed 3 swallows of thin liquid, which is 10 milliliters of water, and thick 10 milliliters of pudding. And then we also collected quality of life measures, the SWAL-QUAL, the voice related quality of life, and the whole health quality of life survey. We did this prior to the singing group and within a week after completing the 8 weeks of the program for all participants. So one of the things the study section came back with after submitting the grant proposals, they wanted me to do a high dose and a low dose. And so 2 of our groups met twice a week, and 1 group met once a week for 8 weeks. The blue bars are the low dose group, and the orange bars are the high dose group. And then we have pre and post. And so our first measures here that I'm showing are inspiratory and expiratory pressure. Both of those measures significantly improved from pre to post singing, but there were no high dose or low dose group effects. So it didn't matter if you were in the low dose group or the high dose group, both improved significantly from pre to post after 8 weeks of singing, and there were no interaction effects. For our quality of life measures, we saw significant improvement in the voice-related quality of life and significant improvement in the whole health quality of life survey. There were no significant improvements in the swallow quality of life. And so they pretty much remain the same. Again, this was just a main effect of time from pre to post, and there were no group effects of low dose or high dose. So in essence, singing once a week is sufficient enough to see impacts on our respiratory control and quality of life. For the vocal measures, we had improvements in vocal loudness and pitch range, but they did not reach significance. Only vocal duration reached significance. And again, that was a main effect from pre to post and no group effects. We still consider this a win. We're talking over 8 weeks. And if anything improves over 8 weeks in people with Parkinson's disease, we consider that a win. Instead of, since it is a neurodegenerative disease, it just did not reach significance. So for swallow, this is a picture of what it looks like to measure from the laryngeal and submental muscle groups. And when we look at the signal, this is an example, we can get certain outcome measures of interest, including rise time. Rise time is from the onset of swallow to the peak. Fall time is from the peak to the offset of swallow, and then the duration is the whole time that it is on. You can also get, peak amplitude, and then we can do measures of area under the curve. So this is an example from one participant that is representative of what we saw over the whole of the study. So to set this up, this is just the root mean square of the EMG activity. It's been filtered and smoothed accordingly. We have the thin liquid here from the laryngeal on this side, and then we have the thick swallow here. Both of these are coming from the laryngeal muscle groups. And then in the top row is before singing, pre, and the bottom row is post. And so what we found is that the EMG rise time and fall time and duration significantly increased. So you can kind of see there's a larger rise and fall time, and the EMG is on for a longer period of time. But we didn't see any significant differences in the EMG amplitude or area under the curve. And so when I first saw this, I was used to doing simple finger tapping movements. And when you do finger tapping movements, you want the muscle to turn on and turn off very efficiently. And I was like, oh no. And then when I talked to my speech and language pathology colleagues, they were like, no, this is a good thing, we think, and suggested that to interpret the results, that by the fall time and rise time and duration being increased, that we're holding the larynx elevated for a longer period of time, and that might actually be helping to prevent against complications from swallow. So we're pretty excited about those results and being able to use EMG. I understand that sometimes can be controversial, but not everyone has access to fluoroscopy or a trained individual to be able to do that. And so using EMG is an alternative method to provide a little bit of insight on what may be happening with swallow. But we do understand that, doing fluoroscopy eventually would be an amazing follow-up to this to see if what else is changing that may be associated with the changes that we see in the EMG activity. So after that first study came out, and I had been in Iowa for a bit, it soon became very popular, and people from all over the state were very interested in having a singing group. And I can only be in one place at one time, not multiple places. And so Iowa State also has a wonderful, I would say one of our pillars is called extension and outreach, which means there's a whole separate institute or program in which we take, well, the point of it is to take the work that we do on campus and extend it out to our rural areas. And so this program was actually funded by our Human Sciences Extension and Outreach. So we have a whole nother college for that. And I worked with Extension Outreach to basically video the program, the 8-week program that we did with the participants that come regularly at Ames. And then an extension specialist took the DVD, but at this end took it to a rural areas in Iowa. And basically it was a pilot study to see, do we see similar effects with a virtual or video type program. So it was 8 participants from across rural Iowa. It was led by, you'll see the video here, you'll see it's me leading the singing group with all of the people with Parkinson's disease, but human scientist specialist was the one that was the facilitator of the group at the locations that were in rural Iowa. And we collected the same outcome measures for voice, respiratory control, and swallow pre and post. So here will be an example of what the videos look like in theory.
It was so much exercise to sing. It's good for you. Keep it up. All right, so let's finish with our Show Me the Way to Go Home. Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. Well, I had a little drink about an hour ago and it went right to my head. Wherever I may roam, land or sea or foam, you can always hear me singing a song. 3 times. Show me the way to go. Show me the way to go. Show me the way to go home. Yay! Woo! Nice job. Everyone did fabulous. Thank you so much.
All right, so that's an example of our closing song. You can see here is a picture of the group, one of the groups, and we involve caregivers and students in our groups. And so you see there are caregivers that are also present in the picture below. So they were watching the video, and Dr. Brown, David Brown, who was the facilitator or the extension specialist, was, encouraging them to sing along with the group. And we chose to do the videos the way we did them because they could hear other people with Parkinson's disease and see other people with Parkinson's disease sing in a group format instead of just me on the screen with them, to make it seem more inclusive. So for this, we set significance at p less than 0.1 because it was a pilot study. And our results showed significant improvement again in both MIP and MEP. And so MIP in this is in the blue line and MEP is the orange line, and this is just pre to post. And they only met once a week for this particular study. And like in the other study, we did not see any significance in our voice measures. But they did improve, but again, we didn't reach significance. And unfortunately, on our swallow data, with only 8 participants, we were not able to get enough data to be powered to show any particular significance, but we showed similar trends in which rise time and fall time here increased as well over the 8 weeks. So, singing with the DVD, still in a group, seems to show similar results as singing in person for 8 weeks. And it is something that we have since integrated post-COVID more frequently, and we'll actually just recently received funding to actually test this in more detail using Zoom instead of a DVD program, where they are, I guess that would be live, like a hybrid group where I lead my group in Ames, but the groups will meet at the extension offices with the facilitator, much like this one, but instead of it being a DVD, they'll just log into Zoom and participate over Zoom. So that'll be interesting and fun to see where the group, where things go with being able to expand the singing intervention to rural areas where people may have less access to care and specialty care for Parkinson's disease. So we're excited about that. So our third study, this is from Dr. Jessie Brown, the lovely moderator. This is her dissertation. So if you have questions, you can just ask her instead of me today. So her study was a 4-week crossover at-home program looking at how therapeutic singing, like what we were doing on the video, compared to EMST, the gold standard for treating respiratory control and swallow and Parkinson's disease. So as just a background, Jessie is a music therapist and a speech language pathologist and a neuroscientist and a gerontologist now. So she's amazing credentials, and so doing this study was like right up her alley to be able to compare the two of them, which I thought was fabulous because I would, my background in music therapy and neuroscience, I would have loved to look at it compared to EMST, but I didn't have the appropriate training skills and credentials to do so. So bringing Jessie in just was amazing, and she was wonderful and is wonderful to work with. So she was able to recruit 14 participants from across Iowa. So again, she was in rural Iowa, and some days she had to travel 3 hours just to get one way to get a data collection. So talk about commitment. The intervention was 20 to 25 minutes, 5 days a week. So the therapeutic singing, like the video that you saw for the previous study, she took that video and condensed it down to shorter 20 to 25 minutes instead of, I should say, we meet for an hour once a week. So she took those videos, condensed them down to 20 to 25 minutes, and that's what they would do 5 days a week to match the dosage of what people do for EMST. For her outcome measures, she did respiratory control, again with MIP and MEP, and she was interested in cough. So just kind of like what we said at the beginning, where if something goes down the wrong way, the first measure of protection is to cough. And so we wanted to know, can we increase the respiratory control? What about cough? Can we also improve that? And there's plenty of literature that shows that EMST is also beneficial for improving cough. But also looking at quality of life, mood, and then she did if that wasn't enough, she did a qualitative interview afterwards to understand the participants' perspectives in which treatment they might prefer. So this is the respiratory results, and so I'm going to kind of lay them out. So because it was a crossover design, we use that because if you've ever worked with someone with a Parkinson's disease or the Parkinson's disease community, you know that it's variable. I mean, it's really hard to match someone with Parkinson's disease to another person with Parkinson's disease because of disease duration, symptomology, you name it. So doing a crossover study, which allows you to kind of use them as their own control. So she randomized her participants into either doing therapeutic singing first or doing EMST first. So on these, what you'll see is the darker gray line is the group that did singing first, and then EMST. The lighter gray line did EMST first and then singing. And I'm not going to go into all the lovely details that Jessie could go into about this data after staring at it for years, probably, and writing it up. But I'm just going to give you the main take-home point. And to also understand that we were not powered, or Jessie was not powered to look at intervention effects, like whether or not things improved with singing or EMST. She was powered to look at the differences, or compare, I guess is the better way to say it, between therapeutic singing and EMST. So that was the main question. Did singing differ from EMST? And the answer is no. There were no significant differences between the interventions. So if we look at an outcome measure for cough, Again, we have the same setup where we have EMST group first in the gray and singing group first in the darker gray black. And what we did see, which is not which is different than what the literature was showing, and we did see a significant decrease in peak expiratory flow after EMST for 4 weeks. And it does, and what we can see here is if we look at the singing, we did see an increase in this measure in both groups after singing. However, when we do what we're powered to do, which is look at the how therapeutic singing compared to EMST, again, there were no significant differences between interventions for the cough outcome measures. So qualitative interviews, again, I'm going to summarize kind of what was found. So the interventions did not differ from one another with respect to quality of life, anxiety, or depression. So those are those mood questionnaires. And so there were no differences between the interventions for in respect to mood. Adherence was high for both interventions. I think there was only one participant that dropped out because they didn't want to do singing, if I remember correctly. And for the qualitative interviews, one was dropped because of intelligibility issues with understanding the interview. So, but still very high for adherence. And the main kind of thing that came out of the qualitative interviews is there was a lot of heterogeneity in their responses. There's some lived experiences that affected how they would use the intervention. So if they were going on vacation, or if they were in a condo with thin walls, doing the EMST was quieter than singing with a computer. Things like that, or life events also played a role in their treatment preferences. And basically, it was split right down the middle. So 50% preferred EMST and 50% preferred therapeutic singing. And so what we take away from this study is that, it's important to maybe have another option, right? And that therapeutic singing can show similar benefits to EMST. And when we're working with such a diverse population, that having other options that might be available to people with Parkinson's disease, therapeutic singing or EMST are good, and that it would depend on kind of individualized treatment. And perhaps there's something where you could do EMST first and follow that up with singing afterwards. But that there could be a combination of the two that would be good for people with Parkinson's disease. But the take home is that from the results of this study, therapeutic singing is equally as effective as EMST, and that they are both equally accepted by the Parkinson's community that participated in the study. All right, so I think this is the final behavioral evidence slide. Trying to make sure I get through everything. This is one that we are just finishing up. It was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, and we had a 16-week program. And because we were funded right on the cusp of COVID, participants would choose if they wanted to participate in person with us or virtually, which is like the hybrid program where it's still a live singing group, but they are participating from their computer at home. We had an 8-week baseline period in which they did not sing at all. So we collected at baseline, waited 8 weeks, collected outcome measures again, and then they started singing for 16 weeks, and we collected data at 8 weeks post-singing and 16 weeks post-singing. We had 17 participants, 7 virtually, 10 in person, and we also collected 11 healthy older adults. The older adults did not sing, but we did the same data collections at the 4 data collection periods. Our primary outcome measures that I will show today are voice, respiratory, and quality of life. Those are still and we're still working on our swallow that we did again with EMG. So these are the same outcome measures that we've used previously. And then I'll talk a little bit about cortisol and peripheral inflammation markers when we get to the underlying physiology. So vocal duration, basically, again, virtual is the orange line, and blue line is the in-person group, and then we have the control, healthy older adults. And so I don't have any stats done on these, so I'm just going to be looking at trends. So this is vocal duration and maximum expiratory pressure. And so what we can see is right after they started singing, we did see some increase in vocal duration. The virtual group continued to increase, and the in-person kind of stayed the same and got somewhat close to where our control group was. For expiratory pressure, there was some improvements that kind of continued over the course of the 16 weeks, but we never reached the level of controls. And then for our quality of life, again, same kind of schema. We don't have controls because this was the PDQ 39, so I don't know why that is a mistake there. And so the red bar is when they started singing. I should have showed that, explained that earlier. And so increase in quality of life outcome is generally an indication of worst quality of life. And I think it's interesting that our virtual group, which was likely probably more isolated at the time before starting this group singing, that then they rated their quality of life a little bit worse after getting into the singing group and maybe having potentially a little bit more comparison between them and other people. First time post-COVID, being out or being with other people with Parkinson's disease versus, our in-person group, there was less of an increase in quality of life measures. I'm not sure if these will hit significance or not, but it is kind of an interesting finding that being in person may help to reduce impacts on quality of life. So our preliminary data suggests that vocal duration and MEP may improve after 16 weeks. Still got to run all of our stats on this. But vocal duration may improve closer to that level of controls, but not MEP. And that there is really not much of a difference between those that are singing virtually or in person for our vocal duration and MEP measures, but quality of life may have been different or worse for those that are singing virtually. And so finally, with all of our studies, we do qualitative interviews. So we have the participants, let's ask them what they think. And so Jessie did that in her study, and this is another qualitative interviews that we've done several different studies. One that's already published after the first study, and then during COVID, since we couldn't do any in-person research, we did qualitative interviews with people with Parkinson's disease, their caregivers, and group leaders of the singing groups, therapeutic singing groups. So the initial qualitative interview after the first study, participants reported feeling less stressed, and they could move better after singing. In our most current ones, our participants reported peer support and better and more effective management of their symptoms from singing. Our caregivers reported benefit from interacting with other caregivers that share in the unique experience of caregiving with someone with Parkinson's disease, and that attending the singing groups or being there provided that opportunity for them to interact with each other. And in the group leaders, when we look at the qualitative interviews, they reported a high level of similarity in the way that they deliver the group therapeutic singing, their content and their delivery, but everyone indicated a need for more financial support to be able to continue these groups. So kind of in short, our behavioral evidence, singing improves now, they should all have may improve, you know, but I'm just gonna say it. Singing improves respiratory control and swallow, quality of life, helps the voice. In general, virtual singing groups are showing similar or results. And that therapeutic singing shows similar results as to that for EMST, for respiratory cough, respiratory control, cough, mood, and quality of life. And that singing is beneficial for both persons with Parkinson's disease and their caregivers. So yay. And then finally, that the structure of singing groups is similar across groups across the United States, which will be good in helping to develop multi-site clinical trials in the future. So we need a break. So just enjoy this video. Woohoo. Everybody's excited about those results.
She's gonna be alright. Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate.
So that was a video that we did during COVID. So we still sang online together, and then we put together a choir video, and there'll be another one at the end to show where we were able to connect with all of those group leaders that we interviewed and all those participants that we interviewed. We also did a video together. So I know you're probably looking at the time going, wow, is she gonna make it through everything? And like, I'll just remind you that our potential underlying mechanisms piece is a lot shorter. We don't have as much data here. This is where we're headed. So one of the first studies I was going to show you is kind of looking just on underlying mechanisms of music. And so some of the previous research has suggested that music activates the reward pathway between the ventral tegmentum area and the nucleus accumbens, and so that would be activating a dopaminergic pathway. And so what we don't have any neural imaging, so we can't look at those deep brain centers. But we can do is we can look at upstream pathways using EEG or downstream pathways using other measures. So if we look at our upstream pathways, we do know there's a dopaminergic pathway connecting to the prefrontal cortex. And in animal models, it is shown that when you stimulate the VTA, you get slow wave delta oscillations in the prefrontal cortex. And so we know that maybe, possibly, music could be modulating upstream pathways for both cognitive and motor pathways. Stimulation of the VTA can also lead to downstream pathways, and that downstream pathway is actually a GABAergic pathway, which is an inhibitory pathway to the locus coeruleus. And the locus coeruleus is one of the areas that has control over your HPA axis, or like if you think about stress and peripheral inflammation, possibly. And so we could look at cortisol or peripheral inflammation to see if music is changing those mechanisms. So the first study, and this is an ongoing study that we're doing, we have recruited 8 female participants so far. They're listening to white noise or their preferred music of choice. We do this using the Muse headband, which is just a dry wireless headband that goes across, but electrodes AF7 and AF8 actually sit right over the prefrontal cortex, so it makes it an easy and quick way to look at EEG activity during rest and then during both listening conditions. And so we obtained the and normalized the delta power from AF7 and AF8 using standard EEG processing, Butterworth filters and epoching our data in 1 second epochs and such, and notch filters, and won't get into all of that. And so basically what we see here is we have white noise, which is the yellow bar, and the preferred music, which is the red bars, and we see A for AF7 and AF8. And so we can definitely see, again, we only have 8, so we're still working on stats here, but you can see there is this trend for on the left side, an increase in delta power oscillations over the left side and a decrease on the right side with music. So showing that music it seems to be a bilateral effect, maybe just impacting the delta oscillations in the prefrontal cortex. We're currently about ready to do the same data collection started in people with Parkinson's disease, and we are also collecting data on their motor symptoms to see if there's any association with changes in motor symptoms and listening to music. So music may influence prefrontal activity. So we also have TMS in the lab, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and we've collected data on 3 people with Parkinson's disease, and we looked at the MEP amplitude, so the muscle evoked potential of the left and right submental muscle groups. So we can take the coil, hold it over the close to the hand knob, but it's really over, that the muscles that you use for swallowing and eating are close to your hands, which evolutionarily makes sense. And so we can actually target those swallow muscle groups with TMS. And we looked at participants that have been singing for over a year, and then one participant who had not been in singing at all. And what we can see difference, the black bar is the one participant that was not singing. And you can see that there is a difference between the right and left submental group activation versus in the 2 participants that were singing, you see a more bilateral effect, that they're doing the same thing. And so for swallowing, that is a good thing. We want both sides of the muscles to be working, both sides of the larynx to be working effectively to protect against swallow. Again, this isn't only in 3 people, but it is another potential underlying mechanism and another way that we are going at exploring what might be some of the underlying mechanisms for these changes that we're seeing with singing. So singing may also influence motor cortical activity. So in our 3rd study, this is a fun one. So we wanted to measure our motor symptoms, stress, and inflammation after acute 1 session of singing, so only 60 minutes of singing. And if you remember back to those qualitative interviews, our participants told us they could move better after singing. And so that's kind of what drove looking at this and saying, well, are your motor symptoms improving, and what might be those underlying mechanisms? So for this one, we have been able to publish some of the data from here, but we're still working on the peripheral inflammation marker data, which hopefully will be coming out soon. So we had 17 participants with Parkinson's that completed 1 hour of singing, and 8 participants that did 1 hour of reading. So they were our control group. We had cortisol from a saliva sample and inflammation markers from blood draw, and neurologists that were movement disorder specialists that were masked both to the study. So they didn't know that it was singing. And they also did not know if it was pre or post, scored our clinical motor symptoms from the MDS-UPDRS. So this is a video example of the MDS-UPDRS. So just the motor symptoms, and to show you an example of what it looks like from pre to post singing. So we have bigger movements for our bradykinesia measures, especially in hand open and close. Faster, a little bit more smoother. Tremor, you can look at beforehand. We have tremor in the hand here, and there's some in the leg that's gone afterwards. The walking. Much faster after singing. And didn't fall on the posture. So this participant improved by 12 points on the MDS UPDRS. And again, those were masked scores, so neurologists did not know. And so a clinical meaningful difference in the MDS UPDRS with medication is an increase of 4 points. And so after 60 minutes of singing, this participant improved 3 times that of what would be done with medication. Unfortunately, not everybody had the same response because they're people with Parkinson's disease. So we look over here at our MDS UPDRS score. We have pre to post, we have our singing group and our control group. Overall, we did not reach significance in the total score, but when we looked at the score in each domain, like tremor, bradykinesia, gait, and posture, we saw significant improvements across the group in tremor and gait and posture, which still blows my mind because I cannot explain to you at this time why sitting and singing would improve tremor and gait and posture. But we're going to eventually be able to explain that with future studies. And then we also looked at cortisol here. Again, we did not reach significance. But what you can see is that there was a decline, a larger decline in cortisol with our singing group compared to our control group. And I would say both of these have been published if you want to look a little bit more into the details of those. So what we did see is with the cortisol data is that singing was not stressful. If you ask someone to go into a group and sing with a group, that can actually be pretty stressful for people. And actually singing in public is a way that people induce stress in other studies. So what this is showing, at least that our therapeutic group singing is not stressful for people with Parkinson's disease, and that motor symptoms improve. So just quickly showing you we did see changes in our peripheral inflammation markers and significant changes in IL-8 and IL-1 beta. And I'm not going to go into these because I'm pretty much out of time. But some of these IL-8 and IL-1 beta were significantly related to the changes in motor symptoms, but we're still combing through that data, and who knows what will happen when we get ready to get it out the door. So underlying mechanisms, preferred music influences prefrontal activity. We know singing may influence motor cortical activity of the swallow muscles. It's not stressful in our group, at least that we tested. And singing improves other motor symptoms, including tremor, gait, and posture. And singing changes peripheral inflammatory markers, which may be associated with those improvements in motor symptoms. So that's what we know so far, and hopefully we'll find out a little bit more. I'm just going to throw this up here. So ways that you could implement a singing group in your area. I'm pretty sure you'll get the comment, but I can't sing. And what I'll tell you to come back with is singing is exercise for all those other muscle groups, your respiratory muscle groups, your swallow muscle groups, your facial muscle groups. So because people with Parkinson's disease are told to exercise, but they often don't think about exercising all these other muscle groups that also need need exercise. So if somebody tells you they can't sing, say, don't worry. I don't expect you to run a marathon, and I don't expect you to sing in an opera, but think of singing as exercise for all those other muscle groups. And then finally, this is kind of my soapbox, is that to remember we don't have a cure for Parkinson's disease, and we may not ever find a cure because of the disease being so variable. And what I'd like to say is singing is just a powerful tool for therapy. It can impact multiple PD symptoms, and importantly, probably the most important piece is that it builds a community and improves quality of life for those that are living with the disease now. So I strongly believe it's very important for us to continue to look for a cure, but maybe even more important is to remember the people that are living with the disease now, and to find very powerful and effective strategies to help them cope and build community and improve their own quality of life. And I believe singing is a key component to being able to do that. So I'll leave you with our final video before question.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just to live on. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for
So with that, I'd just like to acknowledge Jesse and Maddie and Kaylee were instrumental in a lot of those data collections that we had, and then my entire lab of undergrads and grad students that help each and every week with the research studies and outreach that we do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stegemoller. I've been monitoring the chat to see if there's any questions. There's one comment about the treble clefs, about the sense of humor that they maintain with the name, and I completely agree with that. And here's a question: can you say a few words about why you chose reading for 1 hour as a control rather than listening to music or possibly audiobook for 1 hour?
Yeah, that is a good question. So we had them come in and sit and read as a group. So we didn't do any audio recording, which would be a good one to do. We wanted groups to come in of people and let them choose, because sometimes recruiting people with Parkinson's disease can be difficult, especially those that aren't already a part of a group singing community. And so we tried to give them as much leeway as we could. The main component of that was that they were sitting in the same room together with other people with Parkinson's disease for an hour. And that's really what we were trying to control for. I can tell you, we in application that grant application that hopefully will get revised and put in soon. What we're using now is actually the virtual singing group, where we take people that have been participating in the singing group, have them come into the lab, and then we can do data collections right before and right after, and then they can participate by joining the Zoom group. So they're already part of the group, and since our outcome measures have been similar, we're going to try to use this, because then they could come in and do a virtual session where they're singing with the group, and then the next time they come in, they can be their own control, and actually we would just ask them to watch and not sing at all, so they would get the same exact treatment. The only difference would be whether they're singing or not. That's a great question. Great. Finding a control for singing is always hard.
Sure. There's a comment saying singing and music helps with depression too. Any interaction with PD? I'm not sure if that's a comment or a question, but just maybe you can speak a little bit about the singing and depression.
Oh yeah. Well, especially in Jesse's study, we found that there wasn't any difference between depression measures for singing and EMST. It comes out in the qualitative interviews and the most, where you just see you hear from our participants how much the singing group means to them, and you can see it when they leave, how much, the smiles are in such a better mood. We haven't actually quantified that acutely very well. In that study, the 60-minute study, we did see a significant improvement in like sadness right afterwards, and a significant improvement in happiness as they measured it. So yeah, it's a big thing, and just being part, whether it be the singing piece, we believe, yes, it's going to have an impact on the mood, but also the community of singing together is a big draw for this population too.
Great. So here's one from Jess saying, fascinating results. Thank you for presenting. And she's wondering if you see a relationship between the benefit from singing interventions and either amount of a home practice or pre-existing music experience.
That's a really good question. So when I did the stats for when the tremor and gait and all of that came through, I put every confounding variable that I could think of into that analysis, and nothing came up. Not musician, not the data collection, because we couldn't collect like all 17 on one day, group leader, practice at home, none of that came up as a predictor of these improvements in motor symptoms or any of our other outcome measures. So I don't have anything officially, but in like my preliminary analysis, when I go through things, I do put those in because I am curious, like, hey, they were a singer before, or how much experience, and we ask those questions, but we don't seem to get any significant results from their practice or being a previous musician. So maybe some other mechanism going on.
And then there's one final question asking you to elaborate on factors considered for choosing the number of sessions across weeks for therapy. So how did you land on the number of sessions?
Like the 8 weeks versus 16, that's a good one. So I think if that first study, 8 weeks was recommended to me by a speech language pathologist, I guess. And we had done a small pilot with like 3 people with Parkinson's disease prior to that, and 8 weeks was about as long as we could get them to go. So it was more of kind of a feasibility, and can we get people to participate in 8 weeks? And so I don't really have much of an answer for the 8 weeks. We did 16 weeks in the second study because it was double of what we did for the 8 weeks. So we wanted to know, over 4 months, what would happen, a little bit longer time frame. And I can tell you, it's a lot harder to get people to stay for 16 weeks than it is for 8 weeks when it comes to research study. But so right now we don't really have a break in our singing groups, and when we talk about it in like, if you look at the qualitative interviews and looking at the structure, these are ongoing singing groups that happen, so they're singing regularly. We do collect, that's another one, is how long they've been singing, and if any of that has an impact on the data, and that has not had an impact on any of our data as well. Because like I said, we have people been singing for 10 years and have people that have been singing for a year, and we still see similar results. So, yeah, so the length of time that we choose is not necessarily related to the clinical experience. It's more related to research components of keeping people in the study and recruiting people for a study, and that's that nature. So that's probably not a great answer, but it's the truth, I guess.
A question I had that came up when you were talking about the acute singing, the 1 hour and then measuring pre and post. Do you have any data or any knowledge or any kind of hypothesis about how long those benefits last after the session? So is it through the day? Is it through the, couple days? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of amazing young undergrads in the lab that get to do some of these projects for their honors projects or just because they're interested in it. And what we have shown is that the improvements, we have some pilot data, improvements in the motor symptoms last, we can't go much further out than an hour after the singing group because it's really, we don't want to be like, hey, sit here for another. It's hard enough to just get them, because the longer they sit, the worse it could be too. So, but we know that they last up to an hour after singing group. And in fact, it's like I talked about Jackie in one of the qualitative interviews. She told us that she plans all of her activities, or she did, all of her activities for right after singing group because she could move better and she was doing better. And so she'd go grocery shopping or she'd do all of her things that she needed to do right after singing. So we know with some pilot data that it goes for about an hour and that we see similar effects with the virtual singing group when they sing virtually, and that those impacts, they're not as robust in some people, but they do improve, and then that improvement lasts for about an hour after singing group. That's as far as we know.
Great. All right, I don't see any more questions coming through, so maybe I think we can wrap it up then. Any last minute
good.
questions from the crew? Nope. Have you done a maintenance phase?
We have not done a maintenance. Well, I would say we did a small maintenance phase to collect some pilot data after the first study. We did have people come back 6 months later, and we tracked whether they had continued singing or whether they had not. But really, we didn't get anything. We didn't get enough people to come back to us after 6 months. Just some had passed away, some, all kinds of things. But that is a really good point, and one of those things we'll have to. I mean, there's lots of fun questions that we can keep chasing, and I think maintenance is going to be a big one too. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you again. And yeah. Any other questions?
We're good.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.